The sky over the quiet valley turned dark as strange shapes appeared above the clouds. People stopped their work and looked upward. Farmers left their plows in the field, children pointed from the dirt roads, and elders came out from their homes. No one had ever seen machines so large. They floated with great shadows, shining silver lights that cut through the sky. The sound was deep and heavy, like thunder rolling across the land, but there were no storm clouds. The people whispered among themselves. Some thought it was the end of days. Others thought it was a dream. But deep inside, all of them felt the same thing. Something powerful had come to Earth, and it was not of this world. The ships opened in the sky like flowers of steel. From the largest one, beams of light stretched downward. The ground shook when something landed near the village. Dust rose in the air. The people stepped back, unsure if they should run or stand. Curiosity held them in place. From the light walked tall beings with armor like stone and eyes that glowed. Their faces were sharp, their skin pale gray, and their voices carried like echoes in a cave. These were the Varric, travelers from far stars. They had crossed the dark void not to make friends, but to show their rule. The leader of the Varric stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his armor lined with bright marks that looked like fire. He lifted his hand, and silence fell across the village. In a tongue strange and heavy, he spoke words that a machine turned into human speech. His voice declared that the Varric had come to test humanity. He said strength was the only truth, and weakness was the same as surrender. The people did not answer. They only listened. The leader raised his arm again, and behind him, other Varric dragged forward a massive cage. The ground shook with every step. From inside came a sound that chilled the air, a growl that felt like claws scraping on bone. The cage was made of thick black metal, yet it rattled as if ready to break apart. The people could see the shape of something large, something alive, pacing inside. The Varric soldiers struck the bars with spears, and red eyes appeared in the shadows. A snarl cut through the silence, and smoke like breath poured from between sharp teeth. The villagers gasped. The creature slammed against the bars, making the whole cage jump. Even the soldiers took small steps back, though they tried to hide it. The leader of the Varric spread his arms wide. He told the people this was their deadliest beast, called the Shadow Wolf. On their home world, it was feared even by their strongest warriors. It had killed many challengers in battle pits. To the Varric, it was the symbol of strength, the image of terror. He told the humans they would learn fear today. The people of the valley stood together. Some clutched their children, some held each other's hands, and some simply watched. There were no screams. There was no running. There was only silence. The Varric soldiers looked at each other in confusion. On every other world they had visited, crowds had begged for mercy at the sight of the Shadow Wolf. But here, the humans stayed still. The leader's eyes narrowed. He thought the people must be frozen in terror. He laughed and shouted, claiming their silence was proof of weakness. The cage shook harder, and the beast inside roared. The Varric struck the locks free. The sound of chains falling rang across the valley. The Shadow Wolf burst out, shaking dust from its fur. It was larger than a horse, its body covered in dark silver hair that shimmered under the alien lights. Its fangs were long, its claws sharp enough to cut stone. Its red eyes burned as it growled at the humans. The ground seemed to tremble beneath its steps. Each paw pressed into the soil like a hammer. The beast opened its jaws and released a roar that echoed through the mountains. Birds fled from the trees. The people did not move. Among the villagers was a farmer named Tomasz. He was not the strongest, not the leader of his people, and not a warrior. He was just a man with worn hands from working the earth. Yet when the shadow wolf stepped closer, it was Tomasz who stood at the front of the crowd. The Varric leader watched with great interest. He wanted to see the man run. He wanted to hear the people scream. This was the moment he believed would prove humans weak. But the humans did not break. They stood in silence as the shadow wolf growled louder, ready to strike. And Tomasz, calm and steady, lifted his head to look straight into the burning eyes of the beast. The Varric thought the humans were finally about to learn fear. What they did not know was that this was only the beginning of something they could not imagine. The shadow wolf stood in the open field, no longer trapped by its cage. Its breath rose in white mist, its chest heavy with power, its red eyes glowing like fire in the dark. The people of the valley faced it, their hearts pounding, but their feet did not move. They stayed together, as if their unity was stronger than the beast's roar. The Varric soldiers watched with eager eyes. They had seen this beast tear apart warriors twice the size of a human. To them, this was a moment of glory. They believed the humans would soon scatter, proving their weakness. Some of the soldiers laughed quietly, already imagining the cries that would come. The wolf lowered its head, growling deep. The ground shook as it stepped forward. Its claws dug into the soil, and every sound made the villagers tense. A child whimpered, but his mother placed her hand on his shoulder, keeping him still. In the front of the crowd, Tomasz did not move. His simple clothes were covered in dust, his hands rough from farming, yet his eyes were calm. He stood like a tree, rooted deep in the earth. The beast circled him, its heavy body moving with the grace of a predator. Its eyes locked onto Tomasz as if it had chosen him. The Varric leader raised his hand, signaling silence. He wanted to hear the first scream, the sound of fear he always expected. But there was nothing. Only the growl of the beast and the steady breath of the humans who refused to run. The wolf stopped suddenly, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. It leaned closer to Tomasz, so near that its hot breath brushed against his face. The people gasped, thinking this was the end. But Tomasz did not flinch. He looked into the creature's eyes, unblinking, as if speaking without words. The shadow wolf snarled, showing teeth longer than a man's hand. Its jaws opened wide, ready to strike, but then it froze. For a moment the world felt still. The beast's growl softened, and instead of attacking, it tilted its head to the side. Confusion spread through the Varric ranks. This had never happened before. Tomasz slowly raised his hand, not with force, not with fear, but with calm. His palm faced the beast. The shadow wolf's red eyes followed the movement, and then, in front of everyone, the creature lowered its massive head. It touched its snout lightly against Tomasz's hand. The ground seemed to hold its breath. The villagers gasped again, but this time it was not out of fear. It was out of awe. The shadow wolf, the symbol of terror, the beast that had destroyed warriors across the stars, had bowed before a simple human farmer. The Varric leader's eyes widened. His soldiers shifted in shock, unsure of what they had just seen. The leader shouted in his own tongue, demanding the wolf to attack, but the beast ignored him. It pressed lower to the ground, as if submitting, its ears folding back, its body calm. The villagers began to whisper. Some thought it was a miracle, others thought it was a sign. But one thing was clear to all of them, the wolf had chosen Tomasz. The Varric soldiers grew restless. One of them lifted his weapon, pointing it at Tomasz. The wolf immediately growled again, stepping in front of the farmer as if to shield him. The red eyes blazed, but they were no longer filled with wild rage. They were filled with loyalty. Tomash lowered his hand to the beast's fur, running his fingers gently along its head. The creature accepted the touch, something no Varric had ever been able to do. The villagers stood taller, their fear slowly turning into courage. The leader of the Varric clenched his fists. He had planned this moment to break human pride, to make them fall on their knees. Instead, he now saw his own power challenged. His most feared weapon had chosen a human. The shadow wolf sat down beside Tomash, towering over him but calm, like a guardian. The farmer stood with steady breath, not proud, not boastful, simply present. He did not claim victory. He only showed quiet strength. The people of the valley began to step closer, forming a wall behind Tomash. They no longer feared the wolf. Instead, they looked at it with respect, for it had shown them something the Varric never expected. It had shown them that fear was not the only path. The Varric soldiers muttered among themselves. Some felt doubt rise in their hearts. The leader shouted again, ordering his men to prepare, but even they hesitated. None of them wanted to stand against the wolf now that it had chosen a side. The field was silent except for the steady breath of the beast and the murmurs of the humans. The Varric leader stared at Tomash, his eyes cold, but deep inside, a shadow of unease touched him. For the first time, his people's symbol of strength had bowed to another. As the stars shone above and the alien ships hummed in the sky, the fate of the valley began to change. The Varric had expected fear. Instead, they found something they had never faced before. Humanity's quiet courage had begun to break the chains of terror. And standing in the center of it all was Tomash, a simple farmer with no weapon, only a steady heart, and a beast at his side that refused to harm him. The shadow wolf stood still in the field, its head bowed before Tomash. The villagers stared in disbelief. Some covered their mouths, others gripped each other's arms, unable to understand what they were seeing. The beast that was meant to bring terror now knelt at the feet of a farmer. The Varric soldiers whispered to each other in harsh voices. They had seen the shadow wolf tear apart armored warriors in the battle pits of their home world. Never once had it shown mercy. Never once had it lowered its head. For the first time in their lives, they saw it bow, and not to them, but to a human. The Varric leader, Varrock, stepped forward, his armor clinking with each heavy stride. His burning eyes fixed on Tomash, who still stood calm, one hand resting gently on the creature's head. Varrock shouted in his language, his voice like thunder. His machine repeated the words in human speech, declaring that the wolf must attack. But the wolf did not move. It only pressed closer to Tomash, its red eyes glowing less fiercely now. A low growl rumbled in its throat, not at the farmer, but at the Varric soldiers who threatened him. Tomash did not speak. He only stood tall, his breath slow, his hand steady. His eyes met the wolf's eyes, and though no words passed between them, a silent bond was formed. It was as if the beast recognized something in him that the aliens could not see. The villagers held their breath. They expected claws and fangs, yet instead they saw loyalty. One brave elder whispered that perhaps the wolf could sense truth in the human spirit. Another whispered that the beast saw Tomash not as prey but as a companion. The Varric soldiers grew restless. They slammed their weapons against the ground, trying to rouse the beast. But the shadow wolf ignored them. It lowered its head even further, pressing its nose into the soil at Tomash's feet. The villagers gasped again, for this was a gesture of complete submission. Varroc's face twisted with rage. He shouted once more, demanding obedience, but the wolf did not listen. For the first time, the leader of the Varrock felt his command broken. His proud chest tightened, and his hands clenched in fury. The villagers, however, began to change. Fear drained from their faces, replaced by wonder. Children who had hidden behind their parents now peeked out to watch. Men and women who had been frozen with dread now stood taller. They no longer looked at the wolf with terror, but with awe. Tomasz moved slowly, his every motion calm. He knelt beside the beast and ran his hand along its thick fur. The wolf let out a deep sigh, its body relaxing beside him like a loyal hound at rest. Dust rose as it settled on the ground, no longer a weapon of fear, but a guardian by choice. Varrock growled in anger. He turned to his soldiers, shouting that this was a trick, that the humans had somehow deceived the beast. But even the soldiers were unsure. They had fought beside the shadow wolf before. They knew its hunger, its fury, its wild nature. This was no trick. This was something else, something they could not explain. The villagers began to whisper louder, courage growing in their voices. Some spoke of destiny, others of ancient bonds between man and beast. Tomasz said nothing. He simply stroked the wolf's fur, his calm presence stronger than any words. Varrock could not allow this. He stepped forward, raising his weapon toward Tomasz. But the wolf snapped its jaws, a deep growl shaking the air. Its red eyes blazed again, this time filled with fury at the Varrock. It placed its massive body between Tomasz and the alien leader, teeth bared. The villagers gasped, and the soldiers hesitated. The leader's hand froze in midair. He had never seen the wolf defend anyone before. He lowered his weapon slowly, unsure of what would happen if he struck. The beast's loyalty was clear, and even Varrock was not foolish enough to test it. The villagers now saw what the Varrock had failed to understand. The wolf was not only a weapon of destruction. It was a living creature with a will of its own. It chose Tomasz not because of chains or commands, but because of something deeper. An elder stepped forward and spoke in a strong voice. He said that the wolf had chosen its master, and no alien could take that bond away. His words carried across the crowd, and the people nodded in agreement. They were no longer a silent, fearful group. They were a people who had found hope. The Varrock soldiers shifted uneasily. They had come expecting to see humans kneel. Instead, they now saw humans stand taller than ever before. The shadow wolf, their deadliest beast, had shown them something they could not deny. Varrock stood in silence, his pride wounded. He looked at Tomasz, then at the beast, then at the villagers. For the first time, he realized this world would not be as easy to conquer as he had thought. The night deepened, and the stars above glimmered like watchful eyes. The humans and the beasts stood together, united without fear. The Varrock had come to teach terror, but instead they had witnessed a lesson of courage. And though Varrock did not say it, in his heart he knew the truth. The shadow wolf had revealed the strength of humanity, a strength not of claws or weapons, but of spirit. The field lay silent after the wolf lowered itself beside Tomasz. The villagers stood firm, no longer trembling as they had before. They could see with their own eyes that the shadow wolf, feared across the stars, had chosen to protect a human. This sight filled them with courage. It was as if the earth itself had given them new strength. The Varrock soldiers shifted uneasily. Their claws tapped on their weapons, their eyes darting from Tomasz to the wolf. None of them could explain what had happened. They had seen this beast crush champions, rip apart armored warriors, and strike fear into crowds of thousands. Yet here it was, Calm as a resting dog, its fiery eyes turned against its own masters. Varrock, the alien leader, clenched his fists so tightly that the joints of his armor groaned. He had planned this display as proof of human weakness. The beast was supposed to break the people's spirit. Instead, it had lifted them. Rage burned in his chest. He could not allow this insult to stand. He raised his voice in his own language, a storm of harsh sounds that echoed across the valley. The machine at his side translated his command for the humans. He ordered the shadow wolf to rise, to strike, to destroy the man who stood before it. His words were filled with fury, but the wolf did not obey. Instead, it rose to its feet slowly and placed its body between Tamash and the Varrock. Its teeth shone in the light as it growled, the sound rolling through the ground like thunder. Dust lifted from the earth. The soldiers took one step back, fear flickering in their eyes. The villagers gasped, but this time it was not fear of the beast. It was shock at the wolf's choice. The same creature that had been meant to harm them now defended one of their own. Mothers held their children close, not in dread, but in wonder. Fathers stood taller, pride rising in their chests. The people were beginning to believe that perhaps they were not as powerless as they thought. Varrock's voice boomed again, his command sharper, angrier. He ordered his soldiers to fire. The villagers tensed, but before the order was carried out, the wolf roared so loudly that the very air seemed to shake. The weapons in the hands of the Varrock trembled. None of them dared to pull the trigger. Even they, who had lived beside this beast for years, felt fear. Tamash lifted a hand, calm as ever, and rested it on the wolf's thick fur. The growl softened. The creature stayed ready, but its rage bent to the farmer's quiet presence. Tamash did not shout. He did not boast. He simply stood steady, his silence louder than any words. The Varrock soldiers looked to their leader for direction, but even Varrock felt the weight of the moment. He could not risk losing control of the wolf. If it turned fully against him, the loss would be greater than any shame. Yet his pride screamed at him to act. His teeth clenched, his breath heavy. The villagers began to murmur, voices rising like a growing tide. They spoke of what they had seen. They said no weapon of the Varrock could break their spirit now. They said the wolf itself had chosen humanity. The words spread through the crowd, turning fear into courage. Soon, the whispers became chants of strength. The sound of human voices filled the valley, not in panic, but in unity. Varrock's face darkened. He had seen many worlds fall silent before his power, but never had he seen one rise louder in defiance. The humans were not broken. They were rising. The shadow wolf stood tall beside Tamash, a living symbol of this new spirit. Its red eyes glowed not with wild hunger but with purpose. The villagers no longer saw it as a monster. They saw it as proof that the Varrock were not invincible. Varrock took a step forward, his shadow stretching long across the ground. His soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons, waiting for his next command. But even among them, doubt was spreading. If their deadliest beast could bow to a human, what did that say about their own strength? Some lowered their eyes, unable to meet the gaze of the villagers who now stood proudly. The leader's voice came again, cold and sharp. He told the humans that this meant nothing, that one beast's failure would not save them. He claimed that the Varrock would still rule, that their ships and weapons would crush all resistance. His words were fierce, but the power behind them felt weaker than before. The villagers did not cower. They did not run. They stood with Tamash, their eyes steady. The shadow wolf growled again, its head low, ready to strike if the aliens dared move against the farmer. For the first time, Varric felt something he had never known on another world. He felt the sting of doubt. His plan had been shattered, his symbol of fear stolen from him. Humanity had shown strength not through weapons, but through spirit. The stars above shone cold and distant, but in the valley, a new fire had been lit. The Varric came to teach fear, yet they had only revealed courage. Varric turned away, hiding the storm in his heart. This battle was not over, but already he sensed that humanity was not what he had expected. And deep within him, a dangerous thought began to grow. If one simple farmer could command the loyalty of their deadliest beast, what else might these humans be capable of? The night settled over the valley, but no one went to their homes. The villagers remained gathered in the open field, watching Tamash and the shadow wolf. The beast lay at his side, its glowing red eyes calm, its great body stretched across the earth like a guardian. The people whispered in wonder, speaking of what they had seen. The Varric soldiers stood back, their weapons lowered. None dared step forward. The image of their mighty beast bowing to a human was carved into their minds. Varric, their leader, stood silent with rage. He could not accept what had happened, yet he could not undo it. The wolf no longer obeyed him. Tamash looked at the villagers, his face steady and calm. He was not a man of many words, but the people needed to hear something. An elder asked him why the wolf had bowed, why it had not torn him apart as it had done to countless others. Tamash spoke slowly, his voice low but strong enough for all to hear. He told them that humans had lived beside wolves for thousands of years. He explained that long before machines and cities, men and wolves had hunted together, sharing trust and loyalty. Over time, wolves became companions, guardians, and friends. Tamash said the beast had seen not fear in his heart, but calm will, and that was why it had chosen not to strike. The villagers listened closely. His words filled them with pride. They realized that their history, their bond with the natural world, was something powerful that even the Varric could not understand. To the aliens, beasts were tools of fear. To humans, they could be partners. The shadow wolf lifted its head as if agreeing with Tamash's words. Its eyes glowed, but they were not wild. They watched the villagers with quiet strength. Children who had once hidden now stepped closer, fascinated by the beast. It did not move to harm them. Instead, it rested calmly, content at the farmer's side. Varric could not bear the sight. He stepped forward, his voice sharp as a blade. He shouted that this was nonsense, that the wolf was only confused, that it would soon remember its true masters. But even as he spoke, the beast let out a low growl, and his words faltered. The Varric leader's face darkened. He had never been challenged like this before, not by a creature, and certainly not by a simple human. The villagers, however, began to grow bold. A woman stepped forward and said aloud that perhaps strength was not what the Varric believed. Perhaps true strength was not in fear, but in respect. Others agreed, their voices rising like the tide. For the first time since the ships had arrived, they no longer looked at the aliens with dread. They looked at them as equals. Tamash kept his hand on the wolf's thick fur. He did not raise his voice. He did not speak of victory or defiance. He only told his people to remember who they were. He reminded them that humans had faced storms, wild animals, and endless struggles for survival, yet they had endured. He said this was the heart the wolf had seen. The Varric soldiers grew restless. They had been raised to believe fear was unshakable, that no people could resist it. Yet here stood a village, unbroken, with the most feared beast of their kind at its side. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, their belief in their leader beginning to waver. Varric slammed his weapon into the ground, sparks flying from the impact. He shouted that this meant nothing. He said he would prove human weakness another way. His words were fierce, but they rang hollow, for even his soldiers could see the truth. The humans were not bending. The shadow wolf rose to its feet, standing tall beside Tamash. Its presence was enough to silence the Varric. The beast had spoken without words, and its message was clear. It had found a master in the farmer, and no command from the aliens could change that. The villagers now felt stronger than ever. They no longer huddled together in fear. They stood with straight backs and steady eyes, their courage shining in the firelight of the alien ships above. Even the youngest among them sensed that something had shifted. Tamash looked at the wolf, then at his people. He knew this moment was larger than himself. He was only a farmer, but the bond between him and the beast had become a symbol for all of humanity. It was proof that humans could not be broken by terror, that their strength came from unity and spirit. The Varric leader turned away, hiding his unease. His soldiers followed, but doubt hung heavy in the air. They had come to show domination, yet they had revealed weakness in themselves. Their most powerful weapon had chosen another. As the night deepened, the villagers began to sing quietly, their voices soft but firm. It was not a song of victory, but of hope. The shadow wolf listened, its ears twitching, its eyes glowing under the stars. And as Tamash stood among his people, with the beast at his side, the truth was clear to all. The Varric had brought their symbol of strength to break humanity, but instead, they had awakened something far greater. The morning sun rose over the valley, casting warm light on the gathered villagers. The shadow wolf sat beside Tamash, its massive body calm and alert. Its red eyes flickered occasionally as it watched the Varric soldiers hovering nearby, tense and uncertain. The aliens had spent the night in silence, their pride wounded, their plans disrupted by what they could not understand. Varric, the Varric leader, stepped forward with heavy armor clinking. His voice rang through the field as he declared that this moment was only temporary, that humans would bend, and that strength would always rule. He spoke of power and obedience, of fear and domination. The villagers listened, unmoved, their gaze fixed on him with quiet determination. Tamash raised his hand and spoke, his voice calm and steady. He said that strength alone did not make a being great, that the wolf had taught a lesson that weapons never could. He told the Varric that respect, trust, and courage were true measures of power. The villagers murmured in agreement, their confidence rising like the morning sun. Varric's face twisted in disbelief. No alien had ever been challenged like this, and by humans no less. He ordered his soldiers forward, expecting the wolf to obey their commands and attack. But the shadow wolf rose to its feet and positioned itself between Tamash and the advancing soldiers. Its fangs glinted, and its low growl vibrated in the air. The soldiers hesitated. Their hands gripped weapons, but none dared move closer. They had faced the wolf countless times, yet never with a human beside it. Its loyalty was absolute. Its obedience to Tamash was clear. Even Varric could feel the shift in power. The villagers began to step forward, forming a protective line around Tamash. They were no longer fearful observers. They had found courage in the presence of the wolf and in the calm resolve of the farmer. Men and women of the village spoke softly, urging the Varric to leave, but not in fear. Their words carried strength and unity. Varric's anger grew. He shouted that humans were foolish, that no being should defy the Varric. He lifted his weapon, preparing to strike, but the wolf stepped forward first. Its roar was deafening, shaking the earth beneath them. The soldiers froze, knowing the beast would strike them if they attacked. Tomasz extended his hand, placing it gently on the wolf's head. The growl softened, but the creature remained vigilant, ready to defend its master. The villagers realized that they were witnessing a rare bond, one that the Varrock could not break. It was not a weapon of fear but a shield of loyalty. Varrock's soldiers began to murmur among themselves. Some lowered their weapons slightly, unsure of their orders. The bond between Tomasz and the wolf had unsettled them. They had been trained to follow commands, to expect fear in humans, but none had expected loyalty like this. The villagers' whispers grew into confident voices. They spoke of trust, of courage, of history, and of the bond between man and beast. Their words carried a power that Varrock could not deny. The aliens had come to enforce obedience, but instead, they saw unity, spirit, and resilience. Varrock's chest rose and fell rapidly. His pride would not allow him to leave quietly, yet his mind recognized a dangerous truth. This village, simple and unarmed, had defied him. His soldiers hesitated to act, and even the shadow wolf's calm authority made him uneasy. The wolf stepped closer to Tomasz, placing its massive body as a barrier against any attack. Its eyes glowed red, but there was no aggression toward the villagers. Instead, it communicated without words. It said that no force could take what had been chosen freely. Tomasz nodded slightly, understanding the silent message. The villagers cheered softly, a sound of quiet triumph. Their fear had turned to strength. Their unity, coupled with the bond between man and beast, had challenged the Varrock in ways they had never faced. The aliens had assumed that terror would rule, but they had misjudged humanity. Varrock finally spoke, his voice low and harsh. He warned that they had not seen the last of the Varrock, that power would always seek to dominate. But even as he spoke, he felt doubt creeping into his mind. His greatest weapon had chosen a human over him. The lesson was clear, whether he admitted it or not. The shadow wolf lowered itself beside Tomasz once more, calm and powerful. The villagers gathered around their farmer, their faces filled with hope and pride. They understood that true strength was not measured by fear, but by trust, courage, and unity. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the valley was filled with quiet determination. The Varrock had come to conquer, but they had encountered something unexpected, the strength of the human spirit, shown through one man and his loyal companion. The balance of power had shifted, not through weapons or machines, but through courage, respect, and the bond between human and beast. The aliens looked on, realizing that this simple valley held lessons they had never learned. Their assumptions had been challenged, their plans interrupted. Tomasz and the shadow wolf stood as symbols of something far greater than fear, a force the Varrock could not command or control. The morning passed, and still the wolf stayed by Tomasz's side. The villagers began to see themselves differently. They were no longer simply people under threat. They were guardians of each other, strengthened by loyalty, courage, and unity. The Varrock had underestimated them, and that mistake would not be forgotten. The sun began to set over the valley, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson. The villagers gathered around Tomasz and the shadow wolf, their eyes filled with awe and respect. The beast's massive body rested beside the farmer, its red eyes soft but alert, ever watchful. The people could feel the bond between them, a silent promise of protection and loyalty. The Varrock ships hovered above, their silver surfaces gleaming in the fading light. The soldiers and their leader, Varrock, had spent the day in silence, trying to understand what had happened. Their most feared creature, the shadow wolf, had chosen a human over them. That truth weighed heavily on the leader's pride. No command could reverse it. Tomasz spoke to the villagers quietly. He told them that fear is not a sign of weakness. It is what humans feel when they do not know themselves. Courage, he said, comes from understanding your heart and trusting those around you. The villagers listened, absorbing his words. They realized that their strength had always been inside them, waiting for a moment like this to be seen. The shadow wolf stood slowly, its movements graceful despite its size. It circled Tomasz once, rubbing its massive body against his legs as if marking him as its master. The villagers stepped back, giving space, their faces filled with admiration. Even the youngest children could sense the respect in the wolf's actions. Varric stepped forward, his eyes narrowed. He spoke in a harsh voice, declaring that this was not the end, that the Varric would return and teach humans obedience. But the wolf let out a low growl that seemed to shake the air. It stood tall, head high, fangs glinting, signaling that it would not allow harm to come to its master. The Varric leader faltered. Tomasz placed his hand on the wolf's head. He looked toward the alien ships and said firmly, "We do not bow to fear. We do not serve terror. We live with courage, with loyalty, and with respect. That is our strength." His voice carried across the field, steady and true. The villagers echoed his words softly, their voices growing stronger with each repetition. We live with courage. We live with loyalty. We live with respect. The Varric soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. They had come to conquer, but they had encountered something far greater than fear, the human spirit. The wolf's eyes glowed brighter as it stood beside Tomasz. Its body radiated power, yet it did not move to attack. It was not a weapon in this moment. It was a guardian, a symbol of trust between man and beast. The villagers could feel the presence of something ancient and strong, a reminder that true strength is not measured by force alone. Varric finally lowered his weapon, though his pride still burned. He realized that he could not command the wolf, and he could not intimidate the humans. The lesson was clear, even if he refused to admit it aloud. Strength without respect is empty. Power without trust is meaningless. The villagers began to cheer softly, not in triumph over the aliens, but in celebration of what they had learned about themselves. They were not weak. They were not helpless. They were united, guided by courage, and protected by the loyalty of a beast who saw their heart. Tomasz looked at each person in the crowd. He smiled, not with pride, but with quiet certainty. The shadow wolf had chosen him, yes, but it had also reminded everyone that courage can inspire loyalty, that calm strength can overcome fear, and that respect is a force no weapon can break. As the stars began to shine above, the Varric ship slowly lifted off. Varric's pride still burned, but he knew that this world had shown him something he could not ignore. The humans had passed a test of spirit, one that no machine or warrior could have forced. He left with a warning, but even he sensed that the lesson was not meant for him alone. The villagers returned to their homes, carrying with them a new sense of purpose. They had faced the deadliest beast and stood unbroken. They had witnessed courage that could bend even the mightiest weapon. And in their hearts, they knew that the bond between Tomasz and the shadow wolf would remain a symbol of hope for generations. Tomasz returned to his farm, the wolf walking beside him. Children followed at a distance, curious and fearless. Adults watched with admiration, understanding that this day had changed them all. The farmer and the beast moved together through the fields, calm and steady, showing that strength is not always loud, but it is always lasting. That night, as the stars shone brightly above, the wolf lay by Tomasz's side, its breathing slow and even. The villagers looked up and felt a new pride in being human. They understood that courage is contagious, that loyalty cannot be commanded, and that true strength comes from the heart. The valley was quiet, but it was a quiet full of power. The humans had not bowed to terror. They had risen with courage. The shadow wolf, the deadliest creature in the universe, had shown them the way. And Tomash, the simple farmer, had reminded them all that even in the face of fear, humanity could shine brighter than any star.